Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to today's webinar. I'm Josh Jones, and today's topic is the role of TA in overarching diversity and branding strategies. I'm joined by Jacquese Brown, Atiba Page, Weston Fillman, and Jessica Jolley. Today's webinar has been made possible by our friends at JIM. JIM's talent engagement platform empowers talent acquisition teams to build and nurture comprehensive and diverse talent networks, optimize sourcing efforts, and uncover actionable insights that inform data-driven decision-making. JIM software has been instrumental in helping companies source and hire quality talent in today's competitive job market. JIM partners with leading companies across all industries, including Shopify, Dropbox, Lyft, McDonald's, One Medical, and Affirm. In 2021, half of the biggest IPOs were from JIM customers. Now, I'm going to show you a quick video about JIM, and if you'd like to learn more or request a demo, please feel free to do so by clicking the offer on the right-hand side of your screen.
Many organizations find it difficult to attract qualified talent that will drive the next wave of innovation at their company. And we're seeing this challenge across the industry, from large enterprise customers like Cisco and McDonald's to agile tech companies with amazing brands like Slack, Peloton, and DoorDash. That's why JIM was created, with the fundamental belief that the traditional ways of recruiting, like managing candidates from inbound sources like career pages, posting on job sites, etc., are no longer sufficient to attract the levels of top talent required to compete in today's digital economy, especially as it becomes harder and harder to find the right talent for key roles. So think data scientists, software engineers, or really any hard-to-fill role, because more and more companies are competing for candidates across the same limited talent pools. The challenge of maintaining a healthy pipeline is compounded by the need to attract for diverse talent. For organizations that value diversity, this makes the pipeline problem even harder because our inbound applicants don't always represent the most diverse talent pools, and we have no control over who applies. These challenges have driven companies to look at better ways to engage with talent where it is in the market. And that's why companies from Cisco to Twilio are taking a more proactive approach to engaging with passive talent rather than waiting for the right people to apply. That's why JIM was started. JIM's founders were engineering managers at high growth companies. As hiring managers, they quickly realized that the traditional tech stack for recruiting wasn't built to support the passive nurture of talent. Because ATSs were designed to track inbound applicants, this leaves most recruiting organizations stuck with managing relationships and passive talent outreach in manual, time-consuming, and error-prone processes like spreadsheets, one-off in-mails, and emails. This means a poor candidate experience, and so many missed opportunities in engaging with top talent when the timing is right. JIM was created to fill that void that exists in the market, a purpose-built platform to manage passive talent engagement and give recruiting teams that workflow, the automation, and analytics they need to be more efficient and consistently build great and diverse teams. And one of the great things about JIM is because all of these passive talent relationships are now tracked in one central place, you'll get much more visibility and predictability into your own hiring funnels, allowing your team to make more data-driven approach to recruiting and hiring.
And we're back. If you're having any audio difficulties, please try to refresh your screen and it should fix that situation. Today's webinar is being recorded, so by the end of the day tomorrow, you will receive an email from us that will contain a link to today's recorded content. In addition, JIM has provided 2 more offers that will show up on the right-hand side of your screen, so pay attention to that for some things to download. And there is a chat feature on this webinar. There's 2 tabs. There's a chat tab and there's a Q&A tab. So for general chatter, we can use the chat tab. But if you have a specific question, please try to direct those questions to the Q&A tab so that we can catch those. And without any further ado, I'd like to get started. I'd like to get kind of a quick introduction from everybody here. It might be fun to kind of, I've seen these memes where they say, describe what you do badly. So I'm Josh Jones, and I'm with ERE and SourceCon. And what do? My job is to get other people to talk about their jobs. And I'm going to go round robin around your screen might be different in a different order, but I've got Jessica next. Jessica, I'll start with you. Can you give us a quick overview?
Great. My name is Jess Jolley. Thanks everyone for joining. I work at Pendo. I lead DE&I at Pendo. At Pendo, I guess I would describe it as a company where we make software to make your software better. So that's really kind of what we do at Pendo. My job is getting the right people, right talent, creating a space and a culture where people can do that and can be creative and drive innovation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. Next, I've got Jacquese. Can you give us a quick intro?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Excited to connect today. Jacquese Brown, I'm the Senior Director of Diversity Programs at CLO. And so CLO is an RPO. And I have the pleasure of working with all of our clients to build out diversity strategies, partnerships, and all types of diversity branding to make sure that they're building the right pipeline. So if I was to say what I did badly, I guess I help people figure out where they're going and how they're getting there, right?
Love it. And going clockwise around the circle, Wes, you're up.
Hi, my name's Wes, or Weston Fillman. I'm the head of our diverse talent communities program at Zendesk, which is building out our diversity recruiting partnerships across our DEI org. Zendesk is a customer service company, and we're big champions of customer service. So I think if I had to give a bad job name, I guess I'd be building partnerships for the future or something like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Atiba, you're up. Can you give us a quick intro?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Atiba Page. I help to lead the D&I strategy for Bristol Myers Squibb. And if one way to describe my role is I get people to come along with me to cause healthy disruptions.
Healthy disruption. I love that. Okay. Well, thank you to everyone that's tuned in today. Let's just dive right in. I'd like to kind of start this webinar by first defining diversity. Let's just kind of start there. And I'm just going to call on folks. Atiba, can you help us out with that?
Absolutely. So the D for diversity belongs to the D in differences. So diversity is all about celebrating differences, whether it's your gender, your race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status.
Perfect. Is there anything to add, or have we landed on the perfect description?
I'll open it up to the panelists because to me, there is no perfect description, but I feel like everyone was probably included, but D&I superstars, anything else to add?
I think the one piece, that I would add, I think that's a, perfect, kind of definition, but knowing that there's no kind of perfect one, I think of diversity also as, being reflective on, what's missing from our team or what's missing from our company, right? Like what voices do we not have, at the table, whether it being leadership on a team, a room of hiring managers, that sort of thing. So I think as we, continually think about diversity, right, it is partially, in large part, and should be, protected classes of individuals and those historically underrepresented, but also, requires us to also look a little bit inward and, and be mindful of, do we have teams and spaces that are largely people cut from the same cloth?
Yeah, I would add to that, Wes. I love that definition of diversity and how they'll defined it. And at Pendo, we talk a lot about the diversity aspect, celebrating our uniqueness and differences. But then I think the E&I, do we have a space of inclusion? Can people bring those differences to the company and to the culture? Is there psychological safety? Meaning, can people come in and say, hey, I view this differently, or from my lived experience, I might disagree? That like healthy disruption, do you have space to do that? And then is there equity? Do people have the same opportunities? Is there fairness in your process? And what does equity look like at your company? So I think often we think about the diversity aspect and like representation, but what does it look like when people are working together, and does everyone feel comfortable and do they feel like they can thrive at the companies they're at?
Yeah, no, I certainly align with that, Jess. I think that that's the other part that I agree with what everyone said. I think there is always that additional aspect where we're always thinking about the difference. We're always thinking about the different margins or the separate segments. But it's also kind of celebrating the similarities. What are the common ground for common goals that we can connect and grow a little bit further? So I think it's a very broad definition, right? That becomes fluid based off of whether you're talking about diversity of thought or segmentation or equity, right? It can go into so many various areas. But yeah, I think all together we've come up with a pretty good one.
Thank you so much. I think that's great. And I think for me, when I think about it, diversity is a two-way street. We think about including people, but I think that we also need to bring a compassionate curiosity. So we're not just tolerating or including people, but we have an active interest in where they're coming from, and we want to honor that. So as much as I want people to learn about me, I want to learn about other folks too. And I think that creates a very inclusive environment where everybody feels like they can thrive and bring their best selves to work. I want to talk about how this plays in with branding and the relationship between branding and diversity initiatives. How are the best teams managing this? And if we could, Jacquese, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. I work with a lot of different teams, but I think the best scenario that I've seen, they hopefully are close. They hopefully are aligned. That is the biggest part. The two areas where I see opportunities for most organizations is to, one, be clear about what are your company's views on inclusive workforces, corporate responsibility, equitable practices, right? All of those things, they have to be very clear about that, intentionally clear externally, and be honest about it. What are they? And that honest factor comes very closely into, I think, the second point, which would be make sure that they are aligned internally. I think anybody who's worked on diversity or brand initiatives have seen a lot of organizations have that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, we need to put out some specific stats, or, oh, we need to hurry up and do a diversity page, or, so many various things that were done as a reactive response. But if it wasn't aligned internal with their current employees, we saw a lot of backlash where it was, oh, we do that? I didn't even know we had that program, or that exists, or are we nice to each other within this organization, right? So you want to make sure absolutely that whatever you are communicating externally has been embraced internally and is truly something that's filtered across the board.
That makes total sense. Anyone else from the panel to add?
That point around just that honesty is so critical. Like if you are talking about DEI externally, it has to be from a voice of authenticity. And often you'll hear, like I think to that example, if employees don't feel like it's authentic to the brand and you're saying some message, then people are vocal about that. So I think we always at Pendo say, like, we have to do the work internally before we're public about it. We could be direct and transparent. And so making sure that you're talking with employees and you're not creating messaging strategies or branding, in a silo. Bring employees to the table to help create and to respond and to think about that branding.
Yeah, I love what both of you have shared. I think, to the one point I would add is, we need to build DEI and diversity into everything that we're doing, especially around, our talent brand, around, our just employer brand and our positioning as a company. And we should be thinking about how does diversity, how's it not something extra, right? Or not something that's added on. If we're truly living it internally, like if we're, the way we should be, that should come through, right? And we should be able to show it without necessarily, exactly telling a specific DEI, story or journey.
I love the showing it, like show me, don't tell me, right? Like really walk the walk. Which kind of brings me to my next question. I want to better understand the role of TA within these diversity initiatives. And Jacquese, I feel like I'm picking on you, but we had a conversation about this previously. So I want to kind of circle back because I thought you had some good things to say about this.
No, absolutely. I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I think their TA leaders and TA folks, period, have such heavy plates, right? They have so many things that they're juggling, that they need to get done and do. And I would say in a perfect world scenario, it would be for them to try to ensure that the pool of talent prospects is balanced, right, with representation from all walks of humanity. And then in a perfect world, a recruiter should just be able to go in and source for the most talented folks and continue to move on from there. But unfortunately, a lot of them are faced with a scenario where the pools aren't balanced, right, where they do not have the partnerships that allow them the time and the space to make sure that they have, equality throughout all of the applicants that are being presented. Sometimes there's a rush to fill positions and they're like, hey, we need a body here. So, the role of TA, and I like what one of my co-panelists just said, there are so many things that have to be done, and you would hope that it would be automatically ingrained. But when it's not, it has to be an intentional act to see where from the top of the funnel of that pipeline to the end of it, where do we need to ensure that diversity is infused in everything that is done, and then stop the leaks. If we find that there are holes where accountability needs to be implemented, where technology needs to be implemented so that the visual measurement of it is very clear, a lot of those things come into play. So I think it's truly just reviewing their own process and understanding what the goals of the organization is, and intentionally making sure that, everything DE&I is included in their process.
That makes a lot of sense. I think there's also the need to invest. Sometimes these teams invest in people and they fill the role. And so they're putting that budget into the role, but then they're not giving these teams the resources or the access to the affiliations or groups or schools or things like that. It needs to be a bigger, or the aperture needs to be wider, right?
It has to be well-rounded, absolutely, because one of the things that we start with within CLO and with our clients is training, right? So most hiring managers aren't hiring managers until they have an open role, right? So they're not currently thinking about what is the right process. Are we getting ready to hire the first of any segment into this role? How do we communicate that with them? Do we let them know that they're going to be a diverse pioneer when they first come into this organization? Is our culture prepared to embrace them, right? There are so many dynamics that come up, whether it is from that attraction piece, the recruiter, or the hiring leader. So to ensure that, and not to assume that everybody knows what they're doing, we need to, right along with what you said, equip folks with the training, the understanding, and the learning, but then it also comes with the tools and the resources to make sure that they're able to get it done.
I love what you said about a well-rounded strategy. Just to build on that, one of the things that I've noticed over the past 7 years kind of working in this space is a lot of times we miss the forest for the trees by thinking there's going to be a silver bullet, solution that like one partnership or a dedicated sourcing team, like, one of those kind of strategies. I've also worked at some very, very, very large companies where we think like, oh, they're going to be able to solve this, problem or this issue with talent acquisition. But the reality is, brilliant basics are often some of the things we really struggle with. To your point on like the hiring manager education and really just making sure that there's no points of failure. Every hiring manager I kind of view as an opportunity, but also as a potential point of failure. Same with any recruiter or any individual if they don't have the tools, the understanding, and like the commitment or passion. So I think that's something that we can do in our roles, but also something that we need to, keep building into the culture of TA and really just hiring in general.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you said that, because that's one of the things that we've definitely been working at a lot more as an organization, and making sure that the recruiters and hiring managers are educated at the same time so they can have a more effective recruitment strategy meeting, because there's nothing like wasting time trying to get someone to be on the same page. We have better success where we're starting from the same point. So again, that's the equity piece. With equity and E for education, they go hand in hand.
I'd add, I mean, I think the training piece is so critical. We just relaunched and did an interview training for all of our hiring managers, and getting specific in trainings. We often talk about DEI and people say like, I'm passionate about this. Of course, like I don't have bias in what I do. And we get specific of like, how does affinity bias show up? Affinity bias being you are more likely to connect or like someone that has a similar connection with you, whether that's school or background. And we like give really specific examples of how that plays out. And you might not think it does, but then you look at what happens in interviews and you recognize these elements where bias creeps in. And so I think really talking about specifics to break bias in the process. And I think really then also using data. We use data at our company. We really looked at, a year ago, our TA team, how we were sourcing candidates, what was happening top of funnel. And then understanding, okay, how do we then find the right partners? What do we need to do around referrals? Measuring that, and then looking not just at our representation at the top of the funnel, but throughout the pipeline. What is happening and how do we measure and look? And if we see some anomalies or something doesn't look right, let's dive in and understand what the process is there and if there's anything that's broken.
Yeah. And you know what? One thing I saw a question in the chat. People were talking about partnerships, right? Having the right partnerships is so key. A lot of organizations I see do a very broad net. They cast a very broad net over who they're engaging with and connecting with. And they're going to do all of one organization, or we need all of the Divine Nine, or we need all of the women in tech organizations, or whatever the case is. And so to address one of those questions, they said, hey, how do you decide what partnerships, right, that you're engaging with? I think you first have to truly understand what it is that the need of the organization is. If you know that you need a specific skill set, don't just do a broadcasting of net to every HBCU. Find out which HBCU has the highest enrollment of the specific skill set that you need, and then build a partnership with that specific university, right? So that you are having long-term engagement, so that you are getting brand recognition with them, that you can build a reciprocated partnership where it is a continual pipeline building. So if I were to be able to answer that one question, it would be to be intentional about your partnerships based off of your needs.
That makes total sense. Sabrina, I see your question, and we're going to come back to that because we're going to touch on goals a little bit later, and I think that'd be a really good time to talk about KPIs. Wes, I'm going to come over to you. Should companies have a separate DEI strategy for TA?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I've seen this, exist in a number of different manifestations from working at a couple different companies. I've seen, a dedicated DEI strategy that is separate from TA, and ones where they are, they're incredibly integrated. From my experience, I think you cannot divorce the, DEI goals from talent acquisition at the end of the day. If we're not integrated in one, having accountability and ownership of these goals together, we will see things like velocity and representation become things that are mutually exclusive, and which that kind of conversation can be really derailing and make it difficult to make progress. So I think it's really, really important that as you think about like a broader DEI strategy, we're thinking about how do we integrate talent acquisition in that. One of the things we do at my company, and we actually did at my previous company as well, is define our DEI programs kind of around attracting, retention, and development in a very intentional way, and really ensuring that talent acquisition is driving the conversation, and accountable and are truly partners in developing that kind of attraction strategy. whether it be things we're asking of our hiring managers and folks internally, or it's the partnerships piece, or it's the dedicated, sourcing and candidate engagement. I really think they have to be, interwoven, and we have to build diversity into the goal of every recruiter, right? It can't be the goal of a diversity sourcing team or my partnerships team, to generate the diverse leads and talent from underrepresented backgrounds, coming into a company. You really have to all be working together, and everyone has to have some skin in the game, for lack of another metaphor. But when everyone feels ownership of it, if it's just recruiter, they're like, I'm not getting enough diverse pipeline from a sourcer or something like that. Like, what are you doing to help build that strategy, to help build that talent pool?
Yeah, I would add, that's, again, we try to talk about DEI at Pendo, driving DEI in all we do. So it's everyone's job. So just like +1 to that point. And I think it's just as important, the attract, but then that retain piece. If you are hiring and then employees are leaving after a year, or they're saying, hey, I don't want to refer anyone from my network to this company, then you have to also figure out what are you doing around that retention and that culture, because that loop is so critical. So I think definitely agree around just being in lockstep and having DEI goals as part of the TA strategy, and then also thinking about what does then that look like once someone is onboarded and within a company, and how are you making sure that you're retaining that talent.
Can we explore these goals a little bit more? How do we define the goals? How do we look at kind of where we are, where we need to be, where we're headed, and then kind of bake some accountability into that, so that if we're being measured, if we have a meeting Q1 and then we have another meeting Q3 and we got to do an update, what do these conversations look like? How are we carving this out?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just jump in. Like, one thing that, whenever we start talking about goals, and before Pendo, I did DI consulting for a decade. You start talking about numbers and everyone freaks out and like, is this a quota? What do we do? Well, I'm nervous about adding numbers. And I always push back and say, we add metrics and we measure every other investment we do. So if we are committed to this and we want to see real progress, we have to measure. And so I think that's just so critical. And I also then try to dispel the myth of quotas, because that could be frustrating when hiring managers say, oh, I'm just doing DEI to check a box. When really, I think it's what we talked about when we defined DEI. This is to bring different lived experiences, perspective to teams to drive innovation. So helping shift that perspective to say, this isn't about a box checking exercise. This is to strengthen our teams, to make sure we have the best and brightest, and we're not missing out on talent that has traditionally been historically excluded or left out of our industry. And so I think that's just like the baseline, because I get a lot of questions around our pushback often around how do we measure and how do we make sure that we're intentional. And then I think the last thing I'll just say on this is I think it's something that Jacquese brought up around being intentional and aligning to your strategy. So at Pendo, we really look at our hiring strategy. And we say, where are we growing? Because often what I see is companies say, we're really going to focus on early career, and that's going to be where we invest. And they aren't hiring any associate level roles or early career roles. So we're trying to measure where we are growing and set metrics there. And then also where we're hiring talent from. So looking at the demographics of the Raleigh community, of the Durham community where we're located, and saying, what does the community look like here? And how can we better be closer to that representation?
One thing that, we're doing, at Zendesk right now is, looking at the representation, across the company, and looking at the representation, in each of our, different organizations internally. And in that, looking at what representation then looks like at different levels, like to Jess's point, like, at what staff level, at manager, senior manager, director, executive, you really have to know what your talent community looks like. I think as step one, and then step two is, looking at where you're able to hire. We, have leaned very much into remote hiring. We always had a good chunk of it here, but really leaned to this digital first, idea, which gives us access to a national talent pool. But part of that is being intentional and partnering with, our people analytics team, looking at, what does the external talent pool, look like for, people of color or women in technical or STEM field roles, in sales roles, in marketing roles. And essentially we create, several goals aligned to several broad, profiles. And that's similar to, what I've seen done in even more detail, when I worked at a very large search engine you probably all use. But utilizing that kind of information, I think is really helpful. And I think it also helps us, communicate to leaders, that your organization does not look like what the available talent, marketplace of software engineers looks like, or of sales professionals looks like. So I think that kind of thing can be helpful for folks to, wrap their head around, wait, we've got work to do. And we're actually giving you goals that are reasonable, that are based in, census data, the Department of Labor data, and based in the reality of where we are and where our gaps are as a company. And I think that's how we can get like surgical, with sourcing and create specific strategies, whether that be for a certain role family or a certain internal organization. But if it's not tracked, it's not, getting done. And so we got to do it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think another part that, we're so ingrained, again, we're so much data externally and only helping recruiters and sourcers with the immediate openings and needs. But I think also if we truly take a look at our internal mobility to see how people are moving throughout the organization, and if we see and are intentional about making sure that we're moving people up within a certain time frame, within a certain process, then we can better equip sourcers and recruiters to say that, hey, we know we are going to promote XYZ individuals within the organization, and this is going to create an opportunity within the next 3 to 6 months or to a year for these roles. So it allows sourcers, recruiters, all of those that are planning to continue to build that pipeline, to backfill those other roles. So I think that's another huge piece that companies have an opportunity with.
That's huge. I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm headed to the chat real quick. Jennifer, you've got a great question. How do you balance authenticity in your branding? What reality looks like at your company versus where you want to be?
Yeah, I would say absolutely just be honest. It takes that, you have to be authentic. What we've learned in a lot of the stats and a lot of the metrics that we've seen is that applicants are not looking for perfection. They are looking for honesty. They want companies to be honest. So it is okay to say that this is where we are as an organization, and this is where we aspire to be. We do have opportunities in these areas, and this is what we are doing to address it. And to be consistent in your messaging, not a one-time post, but, people are looking for those receipts now. You can't just put out there and say, oh, this is our goal in 2050, right? You want to see where you're going along that line. So I just think
Jacquese, I want to ask, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, at Pindo, one of our values is being direct and transparent. And I think that's spot on. Like, be honest, and both externally and internally. So we quarterly look at our representation numbers. We put that on our website. And I have had so many candidates or so many employees say the honesty, being able to see like, hey, we have work to do, but that transparency means so much. And I think that is just really, really important. And being able to communicate in that same way, hey, we know we have work to do, but we're being transparent. I think that inauthenticity of saying, putting pictures and people on the site and you don't have that representation in your company, people and employees read through that really quickly. And so I think it's much better to be honest, direct, transparent, and acknowledge gaps and progress that you still have to do.
I always say we should hang a lantern on our problems, which I took from, I think it's a Chris Matthews hardball, I read 15 years ago when I was in, college, but hanging a lantern on our problem and calling it out, creating that vulnerability, whether it be internally or externally. I just feel like that's how we get people bought in, and we get to leverage the voices that we have at the company. That honesty empowers and energizes, our folks from traditionally underrepresented communities to, want to work with us, and don't feel like we're pulling the wool over their eyes. So that's something I really believe in too.
100%.
I have to say though, I feel like if you're going to be honest, like be all the way honest, don't say that you create, like this is a safe place to come and bring problems. No. Is it really a safe place where you ensure that there is no backlash or retaliation because someone's bringing you the truth? So I'm all about honesty, but I'm even more about creating a safe space for people to be honest so there's no backlash so we can have continued dialogue.
I want to go to. I'm hesitant to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it. I want to address, because we're talking about handing or hanging lanterns on the issues, which I think is huge, because I think for maybe it's not a one-to-one, but for the candidates that if they see trouble or they see smoke on the horizon, there are candidates that will run away from that. But there are also candidates that are going to lean in and they'll see an opportunity to be a catalyst for change. What are some of the biggest challenges that our panelists here see when it comes to building out TA diversity strategies? What are things that we need to look out for?
Yeah, no, I can jump in there if it's okay.
Sure.
One of the things that I see for a lot of organizations is just taking that introspective look within and understanding and truly identifying where they are as an organization. So many companies are very comfortable with either one or a portion segment of diversity, and they hang their hat on there instead of the lantern on the other areas because it's easier, right? But to truly either partner with a third party or work with somebody to come in and help you assess and truly identify where you're at, what are you doing well, and what are the opportunities? I think that's absolutely the first step. And that's how, at Cielo, when I work as a consultant with a lot of our partners, it starts with that assessment. We have a lot of organizations say, can you just tell me who's doing it perfect so I can try to mimic them? Or can you just show me, what I'm doing? And then I don't want to know everything, but just tell me certain pieces, right? And it's one of those scenarios. There's a quote that simply says you cannot identify where you want to go until you first are very clear about where you are. And I think a lot of organizations, the biggest challenge in juggling all of the other competing concerns and goals that they have is truly taking that moment to say, okay, truly, where are we as an organization, so that we can understand how do we start to strategize on where we want to be, and then how we get there.
I think that's I'm so glad you said that, because once you do that, it will help set a better level set for the playing field to understand, okay, is this the right partner for me? Should I be looking at other partners? Because that's the thing that I appreciate about Cielo. We've used them previously. And the one thing that I like an accountability partner. I don't want someone who's just going to partner with me because I'm coming from a big team. If we're going to partner, I need you to hold me accountable, because it's very easy to slide on the banana peel and go backwards instead of forward.
There's banana peels everywhere. You got to watch out for them, right?
Absolutely.
The other piece that I've seen, that has been a huge challenge is end-to-end tracking of the full TA process. Most companies have pieces, right? They can either see where people are applying, or they can see how many people were actually hired. They might be able to see how many people were within the organization. But from what I've seen, there's consistently a gap. Right. So how do organizations find that end-to-end tracking of all of the points that are very important for them and that they want to measure and continue to hold themselves accountable against? I think that's been another really a big challenge that I've seen. Another one is lack of consistency, right? People start out really good, but then there's a fall off or it doesn't reappear until there's some type of recognition month. And then it's, oh my goodness, it's XYZ month. So we need to hurry up and do something, right? So it becomes very reactive. So if it is not ingrained into the culture or it isn't a business pillar, then we see that lack of consistency across the board. And then I think the last thing would be a strategic plan. There's again a lot of reactionary or maybe one-off initiatives here or there, but there is not a strategic plan for a lot of organizations that say our TA approach through diversity is going to align with the organization, and this is what it looks like in a quarterly, monthly, 6-month, annual basis.
I'm glad you said that, because my role is D&I, but I sit within TA. So, and because of that, I have a quarterly report that I report out to our CEO and plus leadership, including board members. So this is something that everybody is championing. We're focusing is one consistent message, which is extremely important.
And I would add, I think that consistency requires investment. And that's something that often people say, I really want to, I'm committed to increasing our representation, and we want to see more underrepresented people from underrepresented backgrounds or historically excluded backgrounds. But then when you really dive into how much time it's going to take, how much money it's going to take, how much capacity, then it's like, well, I want to do it. My intent's there, but the investment doesn't match. And so that is, I think, something that I try to be really honest about. Like, if this is what we want to see, what is it going to take? And let's talk about it. And it's not going to be we're going to figure this out in a month and then we're done. It's ongoing investment.
I think just to your point on investment, I saw one of the questions in the chat, is about, should we, do you recommend slate goals or like the Rooney Rule, right? Like I've worked at 2 places, we do something similar. We call it inclusion in action at Zendesk. But I've worked, now with 2 variations and, different kind of machinations of the Rooney Rule. But and I'm very supportive of it. I think it does help diversify our pipeline. It helps surface folks, at that on-site, kind of level, and ensures that we are interviewing the most, diverse, slate of candidates we possibly can. But my one kind of caveat with that is, it really does require that investment, that you're willing to do the Rooney Rule or whatever you're going to call it for every single role, or all of the roles that you're defining, that it is important for. It also is predicated on that, hiring managers and, everyone that's involved in the process, has invested in the training and understanding the importance of DEI. And I think a lot of this stuff, like, there's a lot of great tactics, right? And I think it all kind of ties back to your point on investment. Like, we have to be invested that the Rooney Rule may slow down hiring, for a handful of roles, because it may take us a little bit longer to surface talent. So, like, what are the potential trade-offs in that? It may cost more money, So I think, like, back to the point of investment, there's lots of great tactics, we can utilize and that are absolutely, impactful. But we have to be ready, to go full throttle with them, and not do kind of a lukewarm, implementation.
There's a question coming in, and we just mentioned timing, but this question is from Sabrina, and they ask, how do you suggest debunking the myth that it takes longer to build a diverse slate? I think in some situations it might take longer to build that diverse slate. So maybe that's not a myth.
I can pop in there since I kind of talked a little bit about that, but I think this is truly role dependent, right? Like, it is truly dependent on the role, on what industry you're working in. I don't think there's any one broad brush. Having done highly niche technical recruiting, when I worked at Google, for some roles, there's, you're working with a very small talent pool of, maybe it's just several hundred people, in the United States that have a certain skill set, right? So, like, in that, situation, it is going to take longer because we're largely engaging passive talent. For, new grad roles or, early career roles, we have a much more, diverse, probably talent pool, at our disposal. So I think it really kind of depends on that. I think the real myth we need to bust is, like, velocity and representation. A lot of people don't think we can hire at velocity, or at scale and do representation. And I think that's like the myth that needs to be debunked more, because that is possible as long as we're doing the investments in diversity recruiting training, sourcing training, making investments in, things like a diversity sourcing team or dedicated strategy, dedicated time, that kind of thing. So I don't know, that's my, perspective on it from, working at some larger tech companies and kind of a mid-sized company now.
Wes, you mentioned kind of earlier, and I don't remember exactly how you framed it, but it sounded like making diversity part of everyone's job, right?
Yeah.
It can't be adjacent to this operation or that operation. It's got to be a top to bottom approach. Within organizations that might be struggling with that, how can we make diversity part of everyone's job? What can we do?
I think it really comes, I think two things here. One, it comes from leadership, right? Like if you're, I've been working on diversity action plans for, senior leaders this week. And, one of the things that I'm constantly talking about in the TA space is how are we going to, have our leaders champion things like championing, the Rooney Rule or championing that kind of thing. I think if we need to build it into everyone's job, it needs to start at the top in many ways. So that way, on the hiring manager or the business side, right, that it's that, DEI or, is being championed by those leaders, communicated that it's an expectation, and creating, that it's an exception if you're going to, say not, meet the Rooney Rule or not, do something like that. So I think on that side of the house, it's certainly that championing. And then on the TA side of the house, it's really building it into everyone's goals, right? Like if everyone has a goal for their top of funnel pipeline on diversity, then everyone, it's the opportunity for everyone to meet that goal. Or if we're not meeting that goal, then we can be strategic around, what gaps, how do we fill this, or where do we double down in other areas where we have access to a more, diverse talent pool, or where we can make gains in other spaces. So I think it's really modeling from leaders and really just, honestly building into everyone's OKR or everyone's, goals for the quarter or for the year.
I'd add to that. I'd like to say too that in all honesty, if the more transparent you are and the more people feel included, you'll find that they'll want to be involved. So it's really just letting people know that what you're doing, where you're going, where there's an opportunity to volunteer and get involved, people really will volunteer and get involved.
I would add, I think the piece of just having it as goals and having it be something that people measure. Like if it's, again, go back to, if you're not measuring it, it's not going to be top of mind. I think that's huge. But I think trying to just also encourage empathy from leaders. I know we're at a high growth SaaS company. And at one point I remember we were recruiting and there were some requirements where certain roles, we wanted people with a lot of, experience at a similar like Series C, Series D company. And I really had to break down the numbers, like how many, let's look at the numbers of how many the founders and who, like 90% of unicorns are founded by white men. So we're saying we want to hire only from this bucket. And now we're limiting and saying anyone who's not in this bucket, we can't hire. And we're only tapping in our networks and we're only saying, okay, anyone who we know. So just trying to have that conversation around empathy. I think often DEI seems so much to do that people are like, I don't know where to start. And like we had the conversation of like, why is this a requirement for this role that's like a early to mid-career level role? Why does someone need SaaS experience for this? Are we really just looking for someone that's a quick learner, that someone that can jump in, and like having those real just human conversations and like building that empathy and trust to break down what are we actually trying to do here? And I think often that gets missed is just like those honest dialogues. So I think that's just something I know that we are working on at Pendo to like build empathy and really say, like, where can we just start? We can't solve everything. It's not going to happen all overnight, but like, how do we have better empathy and look just beyond our own lived experiences?
Yeah, and I think the last thing I would share with that is one of the things I really liked about CLO when I first joined 5 years ago is that they said it's a shared responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. So in a lot of organizations, you see the initiative or the kind of the marching orders from the top down. Or in some organizations, you see where the employee base has it, so you see the bottom up. But I think if you have that throughout the whole organization, that it's a shared responsibility and it's a requirement for all of us to make sure that we have an inclusive workforce, I think it works a lot better. And then just one of the other things that we have done is, just required that diversity training for all employees, not just unconscious bias, but conscious inclusion. What does it mean to truly be an inclusive workforce? So I think figuring out how organizations can connect the top down talking bobbleheads saying this is who we are and this is what we should have, right? And then connecting it also throughout the employee base is very important.
I want to kind of expand beyond the measurements and the metrics and things like that, because I think baked into that is what can we do with these numbers, right? And I think one of the destinations of these numbers is coming back to investment. It's hard to ask for money unless you have a business case as to the why. So what are some ways that we can encourage the C-suite to invest beyond the role within DE&I and really invest in resources and tools? And how does that attach to these numbers that we're tracking? That might have been a fuzzy way to ask that, but
yeah, I can start or take a partial of it. I think the business case for diversity is very sound. I work at a SaaS company that operates 13 offices globally. Barely half of our employees, are in the United States. We build products and tools that are used by folks around the world, right? And I think if that understanding of a business case that like diversity is important to understand our customers, understand, who is utilizing our product and who is impacted by a product. I think if that's not like already something that you're feeling, from your leadership or your board, I think that's one of the first, things we need to do as a DEI team, is to help push us along on that journey. I think once we have an understanding on and buy-in on the business case for diversity and how important it is, for us, for the company to grow, let alone doing the right thing, and building equity into our systems and our tools. But I think once we're able to do that, I think that's one of the ways we can often, make connections to our leaders, around establishing goals or around setting priorities around DEI.
Anything to add from the panel? It was a great answer. I want to talk about employee resource groups and how these can be leveraged. Atiba, you and I had kind of had conversations about this in the past, so I'll let you lead the response on this one.
So I love employee resource groups. At BMS, we call them PBRG, so people and business resource groups. And the reason why is because they really are, for us, an extension of the DE&I component. We actually have full-time leaders who lead the people and business resource groups to ensure that we are successfully meeting our goals. But they also are the way that I can ensure that we're getting back into the community, because our people and business resource group is the bridge between the business, all of talent acquisition, and the community. So tapping into them is one of the best places to start for diversity. And then as someone who belongs as a leader in a PBRG, it's the best way to ensure retention and give your employees like a place to get some of their creative juices going, to try something different, not only head down at your job. So being a part of an ERG or PBRG is a great way just to really understand what are your employees really feeling. Are you really authentic as you think? Because they may not tell it to their manager or directly to you, but they do talk amongst each other in the people, business, or ERGs as well. So I think that all of us, it's a great way to really temp check the employee and to really understand how they're feeling and what it is they want to learn, or what do they even have trust in the organization that we're communicating and telling the truth. So I particularly love ERG.
I think it's really important to build on that, like also to operate, with a sense of care as well, with employee resource groups. We call them employee communities, but, we want to make sure that we're not, talent acquisition or the DEI team is constantly going to an ERG to solve problems, or to provide resources for things, or, give networks, right? I think it's really important that we're also, ensuring that our, employee communities have the resources that they need, that they're also seeing leaders, regardless of background or identity, showing up and supporting them in their spaces, and seeing leaders, make investments by joining, external organizations that connect, with those ERGs, and making those kind of like direct investments. And that, when it comes to, retention, as well, like, are we valuing the contributions people are making, to employee communities? And if we're asking, if we're doing a referral drive with the employee communities, are we, giving something back to them, as well, like whether that be through some of the partnerships, if I'm asking you to come to an event, with an external partner, am I also providing an opportunity for you to participate in that external partner's, professional development program or resources or something like that? I just think I see too often, folks leaning on ERGs as step one, when really that should be like a more advanced step, in a diversity recruiting plan. Otherwise, we're adding an additional tax, and burden on employee community members. That's just, kind of from my experience, but something that I'm, really passionate about, since I'm often working with ECs, for communities that I'm not necessarily a part of. So I think about how, in the Pride EC, like, how I would want that engagement to be, and try to model that, with our work across a variety of other ECs.
Yes, to add, I would even.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jess.
Plus one, all what Weston's saying of like not being extractive, not saying, hey, I'm going to put this additional work on top of our employees who often might be underrepresented in this space, and where I'm now going to say, hey, on top of your full-time job, I want you to do this other, what they call sometimes the invisible housekeeping. And so that's really important to make sure, a lot of companies are looking at paying, employee resource group leaders or full-time roles, or even making sure it's a part of performance reviews. And that's something we're working on. If someone's leading an ERG, they're showing leadership. What's their path to promotion, and how is that being valued? So I think that element, and truly having the voices be able to be heard, and it not just be one way. So we meet quarterly, where our ERG leaders meet with our C team, because we want true partnership. And it's not just, we're only going to our employee resource groups when we have an ask, or we're trying to get more work. I think that's plus one, Weston, to what you were sharing.
Yep, absolutely. I would echo everything you all are saying. I do believe that leaders of ERG should be compensated, whether it is through their payroll or in other ways. There are leadership skills and weights that they carry that are definitely great assets to any organization. So that should be leverage for them. I do also think, though, not at an earlier stage, or that they shouldn't be inundated with all of the asks, but I do think that companies should take advantage of the subject matter expertise of those specific groups. So if it's a quarterly meeting or whatever it is, to say, to use them to run past marketing ideas and thoughts, or ask them, hey, where are you at? Where do you frequent when you are not working or on your breaks? What are you thumbing through? What platforms do you entertain? That's expertise and knowledge that is right there within your organization. I do love the opportunity to, plan and strategize within the ERG group. I really do like alumni programs and understanding where their partnerships are. I like referral programs that partner with your different ERGs, because it's going to extend your reach. So I do agree that it shouldn't be the end all be all, and that full weight should never lie on any ERG. But I do absolutely think that it should be ingrained in an overarching strategy to broaden that diverse pipeline.
Incredible. I am so thankful for everyone that has joined into this conversation. I should have asked this prior. Do my panelists, do you have an extra window open on your computer? I'd love if you could drop your LinkedIn URL into the chat. If it's going to create an issue with your computer, don't. But I think community around this topic is very, very important. And so I would encourage everyone to connect around these topics and really keep the conversation going. Huge thank you to everyone here, Jacquese, Atiba, Wes, Jessica. Can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this conversation. To everybody in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. This is such an important topic. Thank you to Jem for making this topic possible. Huge thanks to the team over there. If you've not checked out their suite of products, please do so. There's a way to schedule a demo on the right-hand part of the screen, and I'm going to drop in my LinkedIn profile as well. So please keep in touch with all of us. If you want to be involved with this program, please reach out to me. If you've got ideas for topics or things like that, or if you'd like to be included on one of these panels, we would welcome that as well. So in close, thank you so much for being here. And until next time, we'll see you soon.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.